This is Paul Johnson today with The Optimistic American. Today, my guest is Mary Dickson. Mary Dickson is what's known as a downwinder. She's been involved in a bill called RECA. Now, downwinder are people who have been affected by the atomic blast that we used to set off into the atmosphere years ago. She's, though, actually actively involved in this bill for all the other people who have been affected by it. What I really am excited about in the show, and I think you'll enjoy, is that Mary is not just a testament to someone who's a survivor of cancer. She's not only someone who was out there advocating for her cause, but more importantly, she's proof that if you want to make a difference in government, it's still your government. You can. You know, so often we get this pessimistic view about our government. We're down on our representatives or our congressmen or council members. The one thing I can tell you is that those people actually end up being more responsive than you may think, but you have to speak up. She's living proof that being an optimistic American actually can still make a difference and that those people that we elect still work for us. Now, if you like what we're about to talk about, go ahead and press that subscribe button. More importantly, write a comment, press the like button. Those things have a big effect. Those comments have a big effect on us because it lets us know what you care about. And the like button tells us that this is the type of programming that you're interested in. Now, on with Mary. Well, Mary, I guess you're in Salt Lake City today, if I have that right, and I'd like to welcome you to The Optimistic American.
Thank you. I am in Salt Lake City, and I love the title of your show.
All right, what's the weather like there today?
It's not bad. It's breezy. It's warm, but not hot.
Yeah, I went and did a run today, and it was like 105 degrees. So
Oh,
in
I'm so
Phoenix,
sorry.
Phoenix is getting hot now. It's we love to boast about our weather, but that's usually from September till May. Minute June hits, it starts to get hotter. All right, so here's what I'd like to talk to you about. Obviously, you have been what many people consider to be a downwinder. There were, I know that in wherever you were located, there were atomic blasts that had happened intentionally by the United States government, and some people who were downwind from that ended up having challenges with cancer and other types of things. But if you would, can you start me kind of at the beginning of your story? Where were you? When did you catch certainly you're not old enough to have been alive in the 1940s. Help me work my way through that.
So, nuclear testing in the United States began in 1951 at the Nevada test site. It's about 65 miles outside Las Vegas. It lasted until 1992, which most people don't know. There were 928 nuclear bombs detonated at the Nevada test site. If you see pictures of the site from overhead, there's so many craters, it looks like the backside of the moon. So atmospheric testing went on from 1951 to 1962 until there was a ban and they moved underground. But those atmospheric tests wreaked havoc and left a devastating legacy for a lot of people, not just directly downwind, not just in St. George, but across the American West and beyond. And that was all done as the government knew where the winds in this country blew. In fact, when they moved testing from the Pacific to the continental US and they were looking for a site, they actually had an Air Force meteorologist who said, don't do it in Nevada because the winds in America blow from the west to the east and you will send fallout across the country. But they stuck with Nevada because it was convenient and it also was cost effective. So they didn't really think much of the people who were living downwind. They knew from the very beginning that radiation harms people, that it caused cancer, and that people would be exposed to radiation from those tests. I have a lot of government minutes from the Atomic Energy Commission during those early years where they're talking about it. And they actually say people have to learn to live with fallout. And part of the fact of life is fallout. So they knew what it was doing. And when some of the commissioners would come back and say, I don't know, we're getting reports about animals dying, livestock dying, people getting sick. I don't know if this is a good idea. They were basically told nothing is going to get in the way of testing, nothing. So what they said, we will have a judicious program of public information. If you think about that, they're basically saying this propaganda. So from the beginning, they covered up, they lied, and they minimized about what was happening. Um, I've even talked to a woman whose father worked for the U.S. Public Health Service during his early years of testing and was stationed in Utah, in Salt Lake City to be precise. And he was measuring the radiation after every test, and it was hitting Salt Lake City. His Geiger counter would go off. He was even stationed at the test site, and that's when they had soldiers stationed near Ground Zero and had them march into the blast to see what the effects would be on people. Obviously, a lot of those soldiers ended up later getting cancer, so they were true guinea pigs. So they knew from the beginning what was happening, and they did it anyway. And
Explain just real quick to
Mhm.
the audience and I think most of us have an idea, but help us understand more clearly what an atmospheric test actually is.
Okay, that's a test that they put up on these big towers and they set them off. So if you saw Oppenheimer and they put it on the tower, that was an atmospheric test. But when those tests go off, they bring up all the soil and ground with them. So it's now radiated. It goes up into the atmosphere, sometimes miles into the atmosphere. It's picked up by the jet stream and carried across the country. Then, when it rains or snows, it literally falls out to the ground below. So it gets into the whole ecosystem, it gets into the food chain, and ultimately it makes its way into human bodies. And
All
that,
right,
yeah,
what was your first interaction? When did you begin to figure all this out?
oh boy. I was a journalist, and in my free time, I was also helping to edit something called The Desert Sun, which reported on the Nevada test site and leaks of underground tests. So that would have been in the late 70s and the 80s. And so I knew about it, and I knew they were leaking, and I knew there were groups trying to stop it. But I didn't really think anything of it affecting me because I thought, oh, I'm in Salt Lake City. All the people who were harmed were down in St. George, Utah. They weren't up here this time. But then I interviewed a photojournalist who was going around the West and gathering oral histories of people who'd been affected. And as she was reading off the list of the illnesses that were caused by exposure, um, I just happened to say, "Oh, I had thyroid cancer." And she kind of stopped and started interviewing me. And she said, well, where'd you grow up? I said, Salt Lake City. Did you drink milk? I said, of course. We all drink milk from the local dairy. And she just looked at me and she said, you're a downwinder. I said, no, no, no. That was just people in southern Utah. And she pulled out a map that was from a book called Under the Cloud, The Decades of Nuclear Testing, and showed me the map of where the fallout went. Well, Utah's almost completely blacked out, as are many surrounding states, and that black ink spreads all the way to upstate New York and into Canada. And that's when she interviewed me. And that was my first notion that I was likely a downwinder. But it's hard to accept that your own government would do something that made you sick. I mean, I didn't want to believe it. And then when my mother started sending me articles about a National Cancer Institute study that showed how much fallout every county in the continental U.S. got from nuclear testing. I was stunned. And one of, I mean, they looked at iodine 131, and that's what causes thyroid cancer. But there are far more dangerous things in fallout. You know, you've got uranium, you've got plutonium with half-lives of 24,000 years or more. You've got strontium and cesium with half-lives 30, 40 years. So you have things that definitely were making people sick. And I know in southern Utah, during the early years, they would report that leukemia rates had gone up, children were dying. I have a very good friend who's from St. George, and she lost her daughter to a brain cancer at age 5 or 6, and she's lost a lot of her family. In fact, just before we started this interview, I took a call from a man from Salt Lake City who told me about his colon cancer. His brother was standing with him as he called me, and his brother says, I have stage 4 colon cancer. Um, and you know, they'd had their whole family had been plagued with this, and they were from Salt Lake. So the damage is so widespread. As you probably know, like Arizona, parts of Arizona are included under RECA, but not all of Arizona. In Utah, only counties in southern Utah are covered. So if you lived on one side of a county line and got esophagus cancer and lived there during 1951, 58, or 762, you were eligible for compensation. If you lived on the other side of that county line, got the same cancer, lived there the same year, you weren't eligible. So that line, I think, is why people think it only hit this small area of part of Nevada, part of Arizona, and part of Utah. But I've listened to stories from all over the West, from and beyond, from people from Phoenix, people from Flagstaff, all these people whose families have been plagued with cancer, and yet none of them are covered under RECA.
All right. So when you find out that that potentially your cancer was affected by you being a downwinder, how did you formulate a strategy moving forward?
Well, I always say nothing makes you an activist faster than a diagnosis. My sister, who was sick, and it took them years to diagnose her with lupus. She and I started making a list of all the people in the neighborhood we grew up in Salt Lake City who had gotten cancer or sick. And that got up to 54 people very shortly. I'm still finding people who did. But because I was trained as a journalist and because I'm a writer, the best thing I had were my words. So I started writing about it, and I was asked to speak about it. And after that speech, I was asked to write a journal article about it. So I wrote an article, footnoted, that started getting out. And then more people would ask me to write about it, more people had me speak about it. And before I knew it, I was immersed in this world of trying to find justice for people who've been affected. One thing I think that's so frustrating to me in all these years of everything I've done is that people just don't know our nuclear past. They don't know what happened to us. And I include in that our elected officials who don't really understand how widespread the destruction was and how many people got sick. Um, you know, there's a man who wrote a book called Nuclear Bodies, Global Habakasha, and he estimates that millions of people worldwide got cancer and other diseases from radioactive fallout from testing in all the countries that are nuclear nations. And that stuff's still there. It doesn't just go away. So my goal was always to educate people. I think the best solution for anything is education, and that's what I tried to do. And I started speaking a lot, and the more I spoke, the more I wrote, the more people asked me to speak. And then I got involved with other people who were affected, and we worked hard. But of all the people I worked most closely with in Utah, I'm the only one still alive. They've all died. So it's kind of lonely. This man who called me today, he said, "You're kind of like a tent pole." I said, "Yeah, and it's getting harder and harder to hold that canvas up." But one
Tell me
thing
about tell
really,
me about this play you created. I find that to be fascinating.
yeah, there was that. So I was testifying at a hearing, and Terry Tempest Williams was there. She came up to me afterwards and she said, "You've got to write about this. This is your story. You've got to write it." And she told me to apply to a writer's retreat in California. I went there and thought I was writing a book, but then I ended up taking these atomic energy commission minutes. I thought, oh, these read like high drama. I'm going to write something based on this. So I started doing that. And then I thought, oh, I've interviewed so many people who are downwinders. I'm going to do monologues and put those in there. So I was working on it. I had a lot of friends in theater. I said, can you do a reading of this so I can hear it and see how it works? And they said, no, you can't just have monologues. And they said, you've got to tell the story of you and your sister. That's the heart of this. And I just said, I can't, because my sister had died of lupus, and it was incredibly devastating to our family, and it was fresh. And I said, I just can't. She said, but it's the heart of your story. All you have to do is cut open your veins and bleed. So essentially, I sat at my laptop and cut open my veins and bled and told our story. I interwove it with all sorts of official documents and some of the people I had interviewed. And a director here heard I was working on it, called me up and he said, "I hear you writing this. I want you to send it to me." And I'm such a perfectionist. He said, no, it's not finished. It's not perfect. And he said, "I don't care how far you are or what you have. I'm going on vacation. Send it to me." I sent it. He called me the very next day and said, "I want to open my next season with this." And I said, "But it's not finished." He goes, "Don't worry. We'll workshop this." Well, I'm not a playwright. I didn't know what a workshop was, but it was interesting because as we sat with a cast and started reading through it, we didn't get through the first read because people kept stopping to say, "My aunt, she had this. My brother had this," you know. And even the director said, "My mother had stomach cancer. She was from Arizona." And they were all telling their stories. And I think that's the thing that play did. It premiered here in Salt Lake, and they extended the run by several weeks because people kept coming. We had a giant sheet of picture paper on the wall outside the theater and asked people every night to add names of people they had lost who they thought were downwinders. And that it got so long and so full, we had to stop keeping it. But we initially started adding those names to the list of the dead that is read at the end. And the very last name on the list is always my sister. Um, so that
I
play
was,
did a lot. I had the physics professor call me. He said, "Your play did what we in science never could. You made people care." And I had a reporter from the Chicago Tribune wrote about it. A reporter from the Guardian in London came. He wrote about it. Um, it it was a pretty amazing experience. It was amazing. And we've since done readings. Stage readings are pretty easy to do. We've done those at various places around the country. And people always afterwards have a story to tell you. Wherever we go, they always have a story to tell you. Um, and I've heard so many stories in all the years I've been doing this work, and sometimes it's incredibly hard. And I remember one day I was about to go to work, and my phone rang, and it was a woman telling me about losing 3 of her children as infants because she lived downwind. She said, "Now my surviving adult children have cancer." And I was so floored by what she told me. I thought, I can't go to work today. Um, and so I collect all these stories of sorrow and grief and try and help these people. And I've been involved for the last 4 years probably in trying to get legislation passed in the US Congress. And I've worked with some people from Arizona and from other Western states so that this bill has passed the Senate, and it passed 69-30 in May. It would add all of Utah, all of Arizona, all of Nevada, as well as New Mexico, which is
Is
where
this RECA?
this is RECA, radiation exposure
Okay,
compensation.
so if you would, explain to us what the bill or the act RECA does,
Okay.
and what benefit comes from it, and then also tell us where you are in the process.
Oh, great. Okay. So the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act was passed in 1990 as compassionate payment. That's what H.W. Bush, who was president, called it when he passed it. And it provided $50,000 with one lump sum to people who could prove they lived in one of 22 counties and had one of 19 kinds of cancer. So it included them. It included uranium miners who worked in the mines, milled the uranium, transported it. It included test site workers and veterans stationed at the test site. So it included these people, but it was always very limited. It never went far enough. It did not include enough people. Yet it was, I have to say, a lifeline for a lot of those people because in addition to the lump sum, which, by the way, if you've had cancer, doesn't even cover your chemo treatments. So if you got RECA, you also qualified for cancer screening, which that saves lives, that saves lives literally. Well, RECA had to keep being extended. There were times it ran out of money and they issued people IOUs. And the date it was meant to expire was June 7th, which was last Friday. So the bill that was developed, and it's co-sponsored by Mike Crapo, a Republican from Idaho, by Ben Ray Lujan, a Democrat from New Mexico, and by, of all people, Josh Hawley, the Republican of Missouri. Well, that bill includes now all of Utah, all of Arizona, all of Nevada, New Mexico, where the very first test was conducted, Colorado, Idaho, and Montana. And it also includes Guam because of testing we did in the Pacific. And it would include new categories of uranium miners, as well as residents in certain zip codes around St. Louis who are still getting sick from radioactive waste from the Manhattan Project that's stored there. Then there are a couple of other smaller areas where nuclear weapons were produced that it would add. So the bill received overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate. It passed 69-30, which the sponsors told us is unheard of. The trick, though, was now it had to go through the House. And this was when the House was in great disarray. Well, I guess it's still in disarray. So nothing.
Yeah, there's an argument that the House is always in disarray, but maybe more so now than ever.
Yeah, it's pretty bad right now. It's, oh my gosh, I don't think they legislate very much. So it's just kind of been languishing in the House, and we've worked harder than ever to try and pressure Speaker Mike Johnson to bring it to the floor for a vote. We've gone back DC, groups of us, and met with different offices to advocate for the bill. We've spoken at press conferences in DC, and we're kind of hopeful because there's such momentum behind it. I mean, we were getting coverage in this wide political spectrum of newspapers, like advocating past this and do the right thing. Um, we thought, okay, this is the closest we've ever come. And even President Biden issued a statement saying he would pass the bill the minute it passed.
Where's
But,
the opposition coming from?
well, the opposition is coming from some in the House who say it costs too much. And sadly, that includes my own delegation here in Utah. Mitt Romney and Mike Lee did not vote for the Senate bill. Our members of the House of Representatives have not signed on as co-sponsors of the House bill. They're arguing that it costs too much. And boy, I'll tell you something. This country has spent over $12 trillion on nuclear weapons since the Manhattan Project. And it is planning to spend 1.5 trillion more. So when they say there's no money though for the people these weapons have harmed, I don't find that very believable. It's not very credible. There's money there. It's a matter of priorities. And what it would cost to extend RECA is a tiny fraction of what we invest in nuclear weapons.
What is the cost of the bill? As the
cost of the bill,
yeah,
according to the Congressional Budget Office, it's $50 billion. But we have always said that's way too high. I mean, if you think of it, the population that it would cover is shrinking. I mean, there aren't that many people left who were around from 45 to 62. So it's not that big. And another reason we don't think it's that high is most people who are downwinders don't know they are. And even a lot of people who are currently eligible never applied. They said, I don't need money. I actually heard one woman who said the government needs that money more than we do. And I thought, boy, they sure didn't need your breast, did they? But so people don't know about it. It's not like they do a lot of outreach around it. So I doubt it's going to cost anywhere near $50 billion. And we've asked the Congressional Budget Office, where'd you get that number? How'd you come up with that? And we really don't have an answer. I think they figure that everybody who would be eligible will apply and will get it. But applying for that is not easy. You have to prove that you lived in that area during those years, and you have to have all your medical records. I mean, so think of it. I was a child. I don't have records of where I lived. I guess I could try and find school records and medical records. It can be hard to go get those, but it's doable. But if you think of people who mined, and many of them lived on tribal lands, if you think of them, a lot of these people didn't even have addresses. They didn't have standard medical care. They didn't have access to it. So for them, filing for RECA has always been plagued with problems. It's been very, very difficult.
So if the House doesn't pass this bill, what's the timeline that they have to pass it by, or it dies?
Well, what we're saying is it did expire on the 7th, but we were just having a meeting today, and we're seeing that there is some wiggle room because the Department of Justice, which handles RECA, is still processing claims that were filed as of yesterday. If they were postmarked as of yesterday, they have to be processed, and that's not going to happen right away. So RECA may be shuttered, but the fight isn't over. We still think we can get it through as a standalone bill in the House. I know there was one representative, Celeste Malloy in Utah, who said, "Oh, this bill's dead on arrival in the House," and I thought, Well, it is if none of you will vote for it. But we're hearing that we've got a lot of advocates in the House, and we're pretty confident that it could pass if it just comes up for a vote. So it all rests now with one man, Mike Johnson, who is Speaker of the House. He has to bring it for a vote.
All right. Now, if you if heaven forbid it doesn't get passed this year, how do you move forward? What do you do next?
That is such a good question. If it doesn't move forward, we'll lick our wounds and come back to fight another day. There is a possibility down the road of introducing it as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, but that wouldn't happen until September.
Why is timing so important? I mean, I think I know, but can you help us understand that?
Yeah, timing is so urgent because we are literally running out of time before we lose RECA altogether, before people lose their cancer screenings, before people who have suffered for years and years and were never included finally get the help they need. So it is urgent. I mean, we are right down to the wire, and we're urging people to call Speaker Johnson's office. He needs to hear from people saying, look, you just don't understand what happened to all of us. I really think, and as we've gone to congressional offices, people say to us, it's so important to hear your stories. We just don't know this. You've got to tell your stories because I think, I mean, we need all the data and all the evidence we have, but nothing gets them like listening to our stories and seeing our faces. They need to understand that. So we're just hoping that we can mobilize enough people to make the calls and find enough people to pressure the Speaker of the House that he will bring it for a vote.
All right, so let me ask some questions,
Sure.
and I'm not meaning to be critical, but I'd just like to parse this apart to have a better understanding of it. So, and some of these questions I already know the answer to, but I just think they're important to put out there. So, someone has been harmed by an action of the government. Let's say that you could prove 100% that it came from them. Mm-hmm. Why doesn't litigation work?
Oh, that is such a good question, Paul. Paul. You know, back in 1984, there was a court case filed by downwinders as a class action suit. And the judge in that case issued a 400-page ruling saying that these people should be covered because the government knowingly harmed them. The government could have taken steps to try to help protect them. The government was negligent and it should take care of them. I mean, and it was packed with all sorts of evidence. Stuart Udall was one of the attorneys in that case. Well, the case ends up going to a higher court, which overturns it, saying you can't sue the government unless they let you.
Yeah, that's the key factor right there. Is that without it, the government has to give you permission to sue it, no matter how egregious it is.
Exactly. So that if we didn't have litigation, which by the way, I've had attorneys tell me they could get us $5 million apiece if we litigated it or could litigate it, and we had to pursue the legislative route. That's why RECA came into existence. It had to happen legislatively. And because you can never prove definitively that one test led to one cancer, it's always had to be presumptive. And even H.W. Bush, when he signed it into law, said to help those people presumed to have been harmed by our government's actions.
All right. So now let me take the next step. Many people have, or maybe most people have, some type of health care, whether it's Obamacare or their own private health insurance or their employer's health insurance. Why isn't that enough? Why isn't that enough to be able to solve the problem?
The health insurance, because many people are underinsured or uninsured. And even with insurance, say, like my percentage was 20%, that adds up fast. And then you look at people who are so ill that they can't work. They lose their jobs. They end up not being able to pay their mortgages. People have gone bankrupt because of their staggering healthcare costs. So it hasn't been enough. And that 50,000 for downwinders, the one-time payment that doesn't even cover chemo, since 1990, it's been the same. And what's happened to healthcare costs since 1990? They've gone cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. I talked to an oncology researcher who told me there's a new treatment for lymphoma and leukemia. One treatment, highly, highly effective. One treatment, $500,000. And insurance isn't going to cover that. So the 50,000, which will be increased with the new bill to 100,000, still doesn't really cover all the costs.
Okay, so that was actually my next question. Yeah. So there are, I think, many skeptical people will listen to something like this, and the sense will be, oh, these people are just trying to get millions of dollars from the government. Now, of course, there are millions of dollars, but does this in any way result in one person getting millions of dollars from the government?
Never.
Explain that.
One-time payment.
For how much again?
It was it's currently 50,000. The new bill would raise it to 100,000.
And so now let's talk about why someone would get 100,000. So if you had cancer and you couldn't work, you were disabled because of it, you may be out of work for 3, 4, 5 years before the end of your life. I mean, that may be the end of life for some people in the process. Others, such as yourself, you're a survivor, and a little bit of luck, and a little bit of maybe divine intervention in that, and then, of course, good medicine that was applied on top. But nonetheless, the point is that not everybody ends up that lucky. Not everybody ends up in that type of a position. So you're talking about $100,000 per person regardless. Doesn't matter what those factors are, correct?
Well, you have to prove certain things, and you have to have documentation. You have to prove you lived in those areas, and you have to have had one of 19 kinds of cancer. So there are some cancers that aren't included. There are also a lot of other medical conditions, like autoimmune disorders, that aren't included, though they've been linked to radiation, miscarriages, birth defects, infertility are all common. None of those count.
None of those count?
No, they don't qualify. So,
okay. And is this all, when you gave that high number of what the estimated costs were given by the government, is that over a 1-year period of time or over a 10-year period of time?
That is it was over 9 years, but now we've reduced it. I mean, originally the bill was going to be cover more. It would cover some health care costs. But we agreed to get it through, so it's been cut down to a third of what it originally was. And that is over a 6-year period. So if you look at it as a per year cost, $9 billion a year. Okay, you know what we spend just to maintain our nuclear arsenal every year? $50 billion. So, and there has been some talk of increasing it even more because of what's happening in the world. So it's really hard. And I would say, I mean, I think of this, and I always say when I go to these offices, okay, what's a human life worth? What's my life worth? What was my sister's life worth? She left 3 children behind who, had to end up going into debt to pay student loans to go to college. What's it worth? And I listened to a woman whose husband had several kinds of cancer, lost his job. She said she was selling everything they had just to pay for his treatments. And that when she sold her car, and this really got me, she said, when I sold the car, my little daughter went running down the street crying, bring us our car back, bring our car back. So, I mean, there are people who really suffer. And so if you say to them, 100,000, you're just grifting, you're just taking advantage. It's not the case. I even talked to a gentleman, and he would have been eligible, and he said, but I don't really need the money. I just want the recognition. I want them to admit what they did to us. And we have, I always say, we have borne a tremendous cost, not just to our health, but we to our well-being. I mean, to sleepless nights, we're worried that it's coming back when we get sick. Um, we've lost our trust in our government. We've lost a lot. We've lost a lot. And then there are all the people we've lost who we have buried and mourned. And, there are literal costs to that, but there's an emotional cost that no amount can ever make up for.
So a couple more questions. If someone wanted to know that they were affected by this or could have been affected by this, how would they find out? Where do they get the information?
They basically would have to go to the RECA website at the Department of Justice and look at what areas are covered. I mean, it shows what's covered.
Is that online or do they?
It's online. It's online. If you just Google Department of Justice, RECA,
All right.
it should come up.
All right. Now, let's say somebody wanted to help your organization, help get this bill passed. How would you recommend to people to be helpful?
Boy, I would tell them to share the stories they hear. I would tell them to call their representatives and urge them to support this bill in the House. I know your Representative Stanton in Arizona has been great about it. But I would urge them to call their representatives and then to call Senator Johnson's office.
Yeah, it's, the thing that I would say just in my experience, and this is true at the congressional level, city council level, we oftentimes see them as elites that don't care about us. What I would tell most people from my experience is they have a lot of things to care about, and you have to get their attention. And if you decide not to get their attention, or you don't get enough people to help get their attention, it becomes very difficult to get anything done. Your effort, you're doing God's work. You're helping out other people who have suffered and who need the help, and it's a reasonable amount. There's always nuances in the bills that people have to work out, but just people's representatives knowing that there are people throughout the country who care. They get their letters, they get their phone calls, and I'm telling you, believe me on this, they read them. They read them, they look at them, they know what's taking place. They know how their constituencies, what they write to them. If you take part in that, you make a big difference. Would you agree with that?
100%. I remember once going to visit a Utah senator who unfortunately is deceased. He told me, he said, sometimes it only takes 10 people calling me or writing me for me to pay attention to an issue. And that has stuck with me all these years. So when people say, well, I'm just one person, no, if there are enough of just one individual calling or writing or emailing, it does stand out. I know one of the bill sponsors was saying, there was a time when Congress just didn't even know what RECA was. They now know what it is. And I think that's because we've met with them, we've talked so much about it, we've written about it. I do think you're right. I think you're right. You can make a difference. Your voice is important. Never think you don't have a voice. And then I always remember what someone else told me. They said, you have to remember the government works for us. We are their boss. They have to listen to us. And so people who think I don't dare talk to a congressman, I don't dare call a senator, never be intimidated by that. I hate to say this, but I've met some of them and they just aren't very bright.
Well, look, I love Adlai Stevenson's line. He said it a long time ago. Somebody said to him, they said, Adlai, don't worry, every thinking American will vote for you. And he said, that won't work. I need a majority. The reality is that you don't always get the smartest people, but that's, I don't mean that as an insult. There are we have a wide variety of people who represent a wide variety of interests who end up getting elected. And as messy as the system is, as mad as I get at them sometimes, it works. But the real failure that usually happens are citizens getting involved and speaking up. And you don't have to throw rocks to speak up. You don't have to burn something down to speak up. A letter is enough. Calling them, it works. Letting them know that you care, it matters.
Oh, Paul, you are so right. I couldn't have said it better. It does matter. It does matter. You definitely will not make a difference or be heard if you don't say something or write something. You have to make your voice heard. You have to participate in democracy. You have to. It relies on it.
It's for me, I think about our founders all the time, and there's always been this question, and that is, can we self-govern? Can the people actually be able to make a decision as to who will represent them? And of course, if we don't make the decision as to who represents us, then they don't work for us, right? A king or a dictator, whatever, they work for someone else. But in the end, not only do they work for us, actually most of them kind of know they work for us, which is why letters work. And my answer to people is, you just don't need to be as skeptical as you are about our elected representatives, but you have to do what you've done. And it is amazing to me how one person like yourself can make an incredible difference if they decide to do so. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work and effort and time away from things that you care about. But if one person can make an amazing difference, and what the rest of us can do when we see somebody doing what you're doing is send in a letter. Send in a letter of support. I will definitely call my congressman, Congressman Stanton. I've known him. I was mayor for a number of years, and he became mayor after me. He's a good person.
Really?
But I'll definitely send him my letter.
Oh, do. And thank him for what he's done. I know he spoke on the Senate floor in one of those 1-minute amounts of time they give them in support of it. So, and I do. When they do something right, I always let them know. I call them and thank them. And I just think it's really important that they know you're out there, that you're watching, and you're paying attention. I think that's incredibly important.
You have a beautiful... I'm sorry, go ahead. I'll give you last comment. I was about to close up, but whatever you have to say is important, so you go ahead.
The one thing that keeps me going, because it's hard work and it's depressing, are all the other absolutely amazing people I've met doing this work. I've met some of the best people of my life doing this work, and they give me hope and they inspire me, and I'm so grateful to them.
Yeah, and I would say it is a lot easier to burn something down than it is to build something up. You're out there building something up, and that in itself is healing. It gives people hope. It lets them know that we can make a difference. So from the Optimistic American to you, thank you very much for all that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If they want to connect with your organization, if you'll send us the website, we'll make certain we put it up right here. All right?
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.